an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Shadows for Silence in the Forests of Hell, Part 2. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the second half of this story, in which shit goes very, very left, and then it goes very right. Hooray! Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Jacqui for commissioning this episode. So, I know I talked about the title in the previous episode. Forgive me. It's been about a month, and I don't remember what I said. But I just want to revisit it, because I was wondering if there was going to be something more about the second half of the story that would make the low-key absurdity of the title make more sense. No. It's not. It doesn't really, hit any better. I would like to know why Brando Sando decided to go with this title. Jacqui is saying Cosmere spoilers. Okay. I will accept that. Because otherwise, I'm just like, this is such a convoluted, weird title. It's not important, but I just had to mention that I was sort of withholding judgment to a point because I thought maybe this would come together for me. And I have to say it hasn't. But if it has to do with spoilers, then that's fair. So this second section starts from, what would it take, she asked, for you to see a miracle instead of a coincidence? It would take a miracle, obviously, Silence said, picking up her knife, instead of just a coincidence. Come on, let's put a second sack on these fellows. So that is where we start. And this is just after they manage to take down their prey and just barely kill this guy without the blood seeping out of the sacking that she has wrapped him in before he makes noise. And right after she had to run a little bit, Silence is forced to speed up in a way that is not safe. And by the time she kills him, the shades are facing her and clearly on their way to getting interested, like they're coming toward her. And they have just barely managed to slip by without being attacked by them. So they wrap him up even further in sacking to make sure that the blood doesn't get exposed to the air. And I don't know if I addressed this, but I think it's really interesting that the drawing of blood is not an inherently magical act. It's the exposure of that blood to the air that gets their attention, like they can smell it. And I like that there is this, there are advantages to setting it up in either direction. You could have it be something that's more of, well, it's the intent that is behind it that draws their attention. You're trying to hurt somebody. You are trying to kill them. The blood is like a symbol of the aggression. But here it's being treated very literally. And personally, I find that a little bit easier to deal with because when you decide it's about the intent, it gives you a little bit too much room sometimes to just decide you can do whatever you feel like doing in the moment for that plot. And, there are times where that can work. The Dresden Files works a lot with intent, and mostly I can accept it when it's done. But often I can feel like leaving too much of a gray area feels like you're giving yourself a room to cheat. And so I prefer this, where there is room to cheat in terms of you can spill blood as long as it's not exposed, but that's room for the characters to cheat within your rules, which feels extremely different from the writer being able to cheat, if you get what I mean. And, human beings find ways to cheat at everything. That's low key why we are kind of at the top of the food chain in a lot of ways, is because we cheated our way there. So I have no problem with this. And I think that it's really kind of fun, actually, that you can have there be somebody who's like bleeding and the act of the murder is already committed, but you are safe until that blood like seeps through. And then you may have a problem, even though the actual murder itself was over 10 minutes ago. There's something, I actually sort of wondered if that was going to be what she was like, what Silence was banking on. I thought maybe she was hoping that since they come and take the body away, which they do in a moment, but they didn't see her take the dude down, maybe the people who took the body weren't aware that she had had to draw blood at all. And so they wouldn't be looking for that. And thus the blood would make it to the surface. The thing about this is, it seems as if the shades know who drew the blood, regardless of how long ago that blood was drawn. And you can correct me if it's not spoilery, Jacqui, but if the blood were to seep out after these people come and take the body off her hands, the shades would still have come for Silence first, because she is the one who drew his blood, even if the guy's body is far off, right? That's how I have understood that it would happen when I stopped to think about it. Because initially I was like, well, that would be perfect. She just doesn't tell them. Maybe she even like cuts the sacking around his head a little bit to help it along so that it leaks out sooner. And then I stopped and was like, well, based on the way it's talked about, though, I don't know that it would go that way. And, that's kind of a wild spot, that you can be the one who's bleeding and they don't necessarily go for you first, even though it is the scent of the blood that draws them. And I'm saying scent, with quotes around it, just as a sort of metaphor for what it seems like triggers them. So because of the fact that they go after whomever drew the blood, it does seem that it's the intent that draws them in the end. But the blood itself is what sort of sets the sirens off. I don't know. I find that really interesting. And because I don't know a lot about how this universe functions and like what caused the shades to form and occur. There's a moment later where she's like thinks to herself how she hopes at least that one of the deep ones isn't summoned. And I'm wondering if the shades are like the minions of the deep ones. Are they like fragments of the deep ones? And do the deep ones, like, were there shades before, but not as many? Like, I have a lot of questions about how all this works. But so regardless, going on with what happens here, they come across these people on the road, 8 men and women. They were from the forts, nice clothing. The way they kept looking into the forest at the shades, fort folk for certain. So this is really frustrating. There's this dude, he calls himself Red Young. And he basically swoops in and takes the body from her. And Silence, her daughter William is like about to sort of step in and try and stop them. And Silence is like, sweet baby girl, there's 8 of them. Just let them we'll figure something out after, but we can't do this here right now. And she demands 25% of the bounty price, which this guy agrees to with a big fake smile. And she knows perfectly well he has no intention. And even if he did, it wouldn't be enough. So she watches them ride off with her bounty. And of course is not an idiot and stops and is like, all right, these motherfuckers knew I was going to be here. They knew that I was going after this guy in particular. So either this man has known the whole time that I do this or am the white fox, or he was told I was going to be hitting up this one particular bounty because of its value. And she comes to the conclusion it has to have been Theopolis. And figures that Theopolis wants to take her in. You know, she wants to take the business away, and knows that she's more than capable of getting this bounty because she's got a very reliable method that she's been using for years and years now. And he doesn't want her to be able to get out of this. So I was thinking initially, like, so he just wants to stop her from taking the bounty. He could have done any number of things. And then it turns out he is out here, and we don't find this out until later, just waiting until he can swoop in and take the body for himself, because he wants to not only be able to take her business over and her livelihood away, but he wants to also collect the bounty. And I was just so disgusted, you guys. Like, it didn't even occur to me that he would still want to take the bounty away, because of course it's not just about getting paid off so that he can't take the business. If he can have both and have the business coming in once he has taken the inn over for the next however many years that this place remains open and profitable, and, you know, potentially with slave labor, it'd be quite fucking profitable. So I don't know why I never thought of the fact that he was going to handle it like this, but I truly it didn't even occur to me that he was the one that was out there with the crossbow. I thought that it was, what is her name? The little girl. And that, like, she drank the potion to put her to sleep, but that it didn't, like, entirely take hold. Maybe because she was so agitated over knowing who this dude was, it, like, wasn't quite enough to keep her asleep. And she came out here and decided to, like, try and assist. But because once that crossbow bolt hits him, and it's clear it is, like, the point of it seemed like it was, well, I was going to say, I thought that it was a blunt tip, because she mentions that some of the fort folk have blunt tipped crossbows, which are designed to, like, knock you back and cause pain, but specifically are not designed to draw blood. But now I'm thinking, and she sees the bolt on the ground has a silver head to it. So why didn't it pierce him? It hits him in the shoulder and it causes him to move and slice William's throat. And because he was the first one to draw blood, all of the shades go after Red. But if it did have a silver arrowhead on it, how didn't it draw blood first? I don't understand, actually. If you guys have any info on that, that's fine. Sabruki. Thank you, Tony. But we'll get there in a moment. We're not quite there yet. So, she walks away from getting the body taken off of her hands, thinking that it has to be Theopolis, and basically being like, if it's you, I am going to fucking murder your ass. I hate you so much. She's so angry. And they are going to this spot called the White Span, which is a section of the road that is flanked on each side with mushroom fields. It says it took about an hour through the forests to reach the span, and Silence was feeling the price of a night without sleep by the time she arrived. This is really interesting. And because it's like a big open field where mushrooms grow. This is happening because they're under a canopy, right? So that is why all of these mushrooms can grow out in what is sort of like an open space, but it's not open to the sky, which I have to imagine that there are places in the world that are like this, but it's such a weird thing to imagine because all I picture with mushrooms is growing in small, shady, damp areas and having like a whole spot where a bunch of them can grow. It just doesn't sound like it is possible. And like I said, I'm sure it is, but I've never seen anything like that. And the description of how they like glow like rat skulls in the moonlight, I don't know why, but I found that so off-putting, you guys. And I need to mention too that all I could picture here, I have been playing a lot of Skyrim recently. I have never played like a first-person game, and first of all had to get over the extreme motion sickness. But there's a lot of like collecting ingredients, which surprising nobody is a major part of the fun for me. I very much like walking around in the caves and picking mushrooms. And I just like kept imagining this spot and how things like glow when it's nighttime in the game. And it was just this, like, I had the music playing and everything. And I was like, this could be a really peaceful, nice moment if it weren't for the fact that we're having to plant some sort of trap for these dickheads who came and took the bounty away. I'm extremely curious about Red Young as a character. I don't know if he has been, you know, sometimes when writers do these short stories, they will bring in somebody that we've heard of or, you know, that has appeared in other books. And I'm wondering if he is somebody that we have seen before in other stories. And when I say we, I mean y'all, not me, obviously. But there's something about him that feels really fleshed out. And the people that are with him all die later on. So when he survives, I kind of was like, is he going to make it out of this because he's like a character that matters, or like I wasn't entirely certain they were going to actually kill him. They don't, as it turns out, but the fact that he has such a big crew with him, I was kind of surprised by, because that means that whatever they get for this bounty, he's going to have to split amongst all of them. And I suppose if he knows who he's dealing with, he probably felt like he had to bring that many people, or else she was not going to give that bounty up, being as though it was worth what it was worth just as a factor for anybody. But then we know it's actually worth the price of like her entire business and her home. So it's even higher stakes for her than it would be otherwise. So probably that's what it is. But I'm just thinking about like the kind of guy he seems like, and I wouldn't expect him to have such a big entourage all the time. You know, maybe it's just like this situation, or maybe he was planning on killing the people that he was with after he got the bounty and not sharing in the end anyway, because it's not like any of them seem particularly significant. I don't know that we get a name from a single other person of this group. So she has this moment where she is arguing with William about whether or not William is going to head back. And Silence is trying to get William to leave and is trying to say, like, you agreed to do what I told you and you're breaking your word. But when it comes down to it, William is just like, you told me I could help. You're going to break your word if you don't let me. And Silence in the end is like, I do kind of need your help, actually. Like, I don't think I'll be able to get this guy's fucking body all the way back by myself. So, yeah, all right, fair. So she shows her daughter what her plan is here. And this is wild. So she shows her this fire starter. She never dared compress the two metal arms, which looked like tongs. Squeezing them together would grind the ends against one another, making sparks, and a spring at the joint would make them come back apart. And does a fire starter like this actually exist? Or is this like, or does something sort of like this exist and Brando Sando just decided to alter it for this story, or what? I'm just curious about, because this sounds like something that would work. And you know, in practice, it's like very similar to a real lighter that we would, where it's like you are causing friction by smushing a couple of things up against one another. But the item itself, like the simplicity of it, seems like that's how this sort of thing would have started. Jacqui says, yep, they're real. That's cool. So she's got this fire starter, which again, reminder, starting a fire is like a real fucking no-no. That's one of the rules. You don't do that. And as soon as her daughter sees this, I had forgotten her daughter isn't aware of the threat to the inn. So she was not ready for shit to be this real. And when she sees that her mother has this out, she's like, oh God, shit's really bad for us, huh? And her mom is like, yep, sure is. So she has that like little jar of gunpowder. She takes these 2 pieces of wood that she's carrying in her medical supply kit that would be used to splint a broken bone. And she puts one of each of the pieces on each of the tong sides of this fire starter, takes a handkerchief soaked in oil and sticks it in the mouth of the jar of gunpowder, puts the fire starter down there open underneath like some loose earth, so that if somebody steps on it, the fire starter will grind together and it will cause a spark, which will catch the handkerchief, which will explode the gunpowder. Truthfully, this is genius. I love this plan. And it is the kind of thing that feels like in practice it would be a lot harder to get it to work than it sounds like in a story. You know, if the Mythbusters were going to try this, I bet they could get it to work, but it would take like several tries. It would have to be perfect conditions. It would probably take like over 30 seconds for the handkerchief to burn long enough to get to the, you know, like that all kind of thing. I don't care. Like, as far as I'm concerned for this story, it works 100% right away. Like, it's fine. I totally accept that. And the thing that is the biggest risk with this is that they could draw blood, even though, like, you know, an explosion frequently draws blood. Even if it's not like you get tossed or you get something exploded off your body, if you're close enough, it could pop your eardrums. It could do all sorts of things. Shrapnel could be flying through the air and you get hit with a rock that just cuts your head open. There's a lot of possibilities for blood drawn here. And, they just kind of don't really have a choice. They have to hope for the best here and see what happens. I assume that even though this is a trap, the Shades would still know that Silence was the one who set the trap, and thus she would be the one they went after, even if, you know, the person who actually stepped on the fire starter was the one who sort of started the chain reaction. So they sit back and they wait for this crew to come rolling along. And they hit the spot. And William Ann has her hands over her ears and Silence is really tense. And when they hit the trap, it seems for a moment like nothing has happened. And then all of a sudden it explodes and it's like truly a massive explosion. It is not the kind of damage that one would expect. And she mentions how like there's a lot of sort of old wives' tales about how effective gunpowder is actually versus how effective it actually is. But you know, it's the sound really that's the big thing that she's attempting here, and the starting of fire. So no blood, just a lot of surprised horses and confused people. The sound had been incredible. Silence's ears rang as she fought through the confused fort folk, finding what she hoped to see. Chesterton's corpse lay on the ground, dumped from saddleback by a bucking horse and a frayed rope. She grabbed the corpse under the arms, and William Ann took the legs. They moved sideways into the forest. This is when Red starts yelling, "Stop her." And he calls his people idiots. And I'm like, I mean, look, guy, I get your priorities here, but they're not idiots for not wanting to be, like, shrunken into shades. So their panic is understandable. They had turned pure black, though the blast of light and fire had obviously left them dazed. They fluttered about like moths at a flame, green eyes, a small blessing, if those turned red. One bounty hunter standing in the road and spinning about was struck. His back arched, black-veined tendrils crisscrossing his skin. He dropped to his knees, screaming as the flesh of his face shrank around his skull. This was wild. I don't think we'd been told specifically what happened when you were attacked by a shade. Maybe we were and I just forgot. But this was not what I was expecting. And there's something about this that feels really brutal. It makes sense because the shades the way I picture this is like, you know, the shades are the soul remaining behind of whomever died. So them touching you and you dying and going through the kind of like transformation that your body would go through if you actually died, where it's like you're blackening and rotting, but almost with more of like a fire effect. Like it's described as you turn black, and then if you're still alive and that was just an injury, it turns gray eventually. So I imagine it as like the gray of like ash, you know, but I may be like coming at this from the wrong angle. I was just really surprised, and I'm covering One Piece right now, and there is a character in that who, he is basically completely desiccates people in the same way and turns them into mummies. They don't turn into shades after that. The mummy is all that's left and they're dead. But, it's just funny that I've been seeing this imagery recently, and then here it comes again. So at this moment, William Ann is just sort of like frozen in shock and horror watching this. And Silence has to get her to turn away and look at her and focus, and reminds her about how we have to go really, really slowly. This is the sort of thing that I can't imagine trying to do slowly when you're watching all of this happen. It's just the kind of panic I don't know that I'd be able to control it. And I think that's the point, because what Silence is really dealing with in this second section is coming to grips with the fact that the training she was put through as a kid that seemed incredibly cruel and was incredibly cruel is what has led her to surviving. And she is trying to reconcile her hatred for the grandmother who did this to her with the gratitude she feels over the fact that she has been able to keep her head and focus during these moments. And just everything about getting out of this is kind of down to the fact that her grandmother prepared her the way that she did. And Silence is highly aware of that, which makes it worse, you know? And this is something that I have talked with Rashawn about when we were covering Song of Ice and Fire. There is a real question about people being put through certain types of trauma at a young age in order to not be put through allegedly greater trauma later in life. And it came up because there's a part where Bran, who's like a 7-year-old boy, is being made to watch his father behead somebody at an execution, because he will one day be expected to perform this act, and he has to be prepared for that. And it was just such an odd thing where it's like feels simultaneously really horrifying that we're like, oh yeah, 7-year-old, definitely sit back and watch this guy get his head cut off. But at the same time, if that is going to be part of his job description, it might be helpful for him to have gone through this sort of thing really young, even though it's awful. And just how many things in life there are like that. And it can get sort of dangerous where people can abuse children and then try and claim it was for their own good. And in this case, I believe that what Silence's grandmother was doing was intended to be good for Silence. Like it was genuine what she was attempting to do. Whereas there are plenty of times where people are abusing kids and they claim it's for their own good. And it's not. It's because they have no self-control. It's because they have anger issues and they haven't dealt with them. It's because they have resentment towards their children for a variety of reasons. There's all sorts of reasons, you know. So I think that it can be easily used as an excuse. And really what's going on is a lot simpler than that. All that said, I appreciate Brando Sando's like handling of it, because what it comes down to in the end is her saying, I hate you. Thank you for making me hate you, which is a wild place to end up, you know, and I can understand, I really can, how hard it would be. I mean, this is something that to a lesser degree, I think a lot of us struggle with is like, in many cases, if we didn't have parents who were outright like malicious and hostile, we were still subjected to being fucked up by certain things because it's unavoidable. And we have to simultaneously reconcile the fact that we love our parents, hopefully, if things are okay, with the fact that our parents are regular human beings who screw up. So you have to learn how to hold both of those things. The fact that they were doing their best, maybe. I'm being a little generous with that, but let's go with it. With the fact that they fucked up and fucked you up as a result. And it's just, you know, as you get older, you grow more at peace with keeping those same feelings like that are in direct conflict with one another in your heart. Because when you're much younger, it all feels like it has to be one way or the other, that you have to love somebody or you have to hate somebody. You have to be grateful or you have to be angry. And, you know, the older you get, the more you realize that everything is a mixture of feelings and everything is multifaceted. And just because something worked out doesn't mean that it was okay. Just because something didn't work out doesn't mean that that person was trying to harm you. It's fraught. So they ease into the forest with this body. And Silence manages to get her to, she says, keep going and pull him away slowly. She didn't look to see if William Ann obeyed, for the shades were upon her. Strength was meaningless against shades. They had no real substance. Only two things mattered, your speed and not letting yourself be frightened. Shades were dangerous, but so long as you had silver, you could fight. Many a man died because he ran, drawing even more shades, rather than standing his ground. So, at this moment, she is fighting them with this silver blade, and I was sort of hoping, as one is wont to do, that just touching them with the silver blade, like if she got it in the right spot, they would basically like explode like a Buffy vampire into clouds of ash or whatever. Not really. It almost behaves like it's puncturing them and they're bleeding, but it's, you know, it's sparks rather than blood. So they don't just vanish and disappear and become no problem. They're still there, but they are injured and they begin to like pull away from her. The shade fell backward, then began spinning about in a mad spiral. The first one flopped on the ground like a dying fish trying to rise, its top half falling over. And the thing is that when she does this, she has to put her hand through them in order to stab them. And it causes the contact that begins the desiccation of her arm. She heard weeping. You stand there, Silence, grandmother's voice, memories of the first time she'd killed a shade. You do as I say, no tears. 4 Scouts don't cry. 4 Scouts don't cry. She had learned to hate her that day. 10 years old, with her little knife, shivering and weeping in the night as her grandmother had enclosed her and a drifting shade in a ring of silver dust. Grandmother had run around the perimeter, enraging it with motion, while Silence was trapped in there with death. The only way to learn is to do, Silence, and you'll learn one way or another. Yikes. And like I said, it's is coming in handy, but it's just horrifying to imagine a 10-year-old being subjected to this. So William Ann runs up and dumps the emergency silver over her hand. And not just like as much as is needed, she dumps all of it, which it's a moment of panic. And it's a moment in which Silence knows her grandmother would have just been so disgusted with William Ann. Like the kind of thing where if she had more training in how to keep her head and be ready for things, she wouldn't have wasted it all. And things may not have gone the way they go later. But in the end, was it worth it? You know, that's the question, and we'll get there. But her hand begins to restore itself, but it does feel weird. And it's mentioned that like months will go by after you've touched a shade before you begin to like feel normal again. So back on the road, the fort folk had made a circle and were holding off the shades with silver-tipped spears. The horses had all fled or been consumed. Silence fished on the ground, coming up with a small handful of silver dust. The rest had been expended in the healing. So this is when she says, sorry I never taught you to fight them. And William Ann says, you did. You've told me all about it. And she's like, yeah, told you, not shown you. So they get their body and they continue moving through, and she hears this noise out in the woods, and they think maybe they're being pursued. They think maybe it's a shade. And this is when she says, God beyond, protect them if the fighting had drawn one of the deepest ones. Eventually, the sound doesn't come again, so they just keep going. And she's pausing to get some water, and she hears her daughter whimper, and she scrambles up and sees that Red is here, and he has a dagger to her daughter's neck. And the dagger that he has is regular steel. It is not silver, so there is nothing for him to protect himself with, and that is why he is demanding her blade from her. And they go back and forth for a minute here. But then Red pulled the silver knife from William Ann, then held it in one hand, the common knife at her neck in the other. Now, the girl is going to carry the corpse, and you're going to wait right here. I don't want you coming near. Of course, Silence said, already planning. I really enjoy that. She's agreeing to whatever in the moment, but she's not just going to fucking take that. Red spat to the side. Then a padded crossbow bolt shot from the night and took him in the shoulder, jolting him. So is that like the crossbow bolt does have a silver tip, but it was padded? I just can't imagine that tip not going straight through the padding. Like, how does that work? I don't know. So, Red tumbled back, gasping, hand to his shoulder. A few drops of blood glistened on his knife. Tony says, no, that's Theo's crossbow. Yeah, but she sees the bolt later and it has the silver tip on it. And that's from him, right? Or was that a bolt that just happens to be there? That doesn't make any sense. Tony says the silver tipped is from Sabruki all the way out here? Or was she carrying that with her while they went out? I didn't remember. So Silence packed the silver tipped crossbow bolt, but didn't bring the crossbow. Is that right? Or is the bolt just happens to be out in the woods where they are? Like that's where it landed when it went out the window? Is this supposed to be the miracle? That it just happens to be right near? Because, you know, we had the talk of miracles ending the last episode. Okay, I wasn't understanding that. I thought it was the same bolt and, you know, whatever had hit him in the shoulder, like, is silver tipped and she winds up grabbing for that. Okay, I got you. So, it hits him. He nicks William Ann's neck. And then all of a sudden, all these red eyes, and they come up around him. And unfortunately, he uses William Ann as a shield initially and shoves her like right through one of the shades, which leads her to begin to completely shrink in on herself, which is awful. I wasn't sure how long this process took, you know? So I was like, is she going to actually die? Which is devastating. It's still pretty bad. And she cannot, like, talk. She's choking. Her lips pulling back toward her teeth. Her eyes open wide as her skin tightened and her eyelids shriveled. Silence snapped her head up, clutching William Ann. Red ran down the roadway, slashing the silver dagger all about, spraying light and sparks. Shades surrounded him. Hundreds, like ravens flocking to a roost. So that's helpful. The fact that he is drawing all the attention of all the shades. They will eventually finish with him and come looking for these two. But for now, it's giving them a little bit of an opportunity here. So the dagger wouldn't be enough to save William Ann. Silence needed dust. And she pulls out the bit that she was able to save, but she's looking at it and she's like, this is not enough. And I know if I were to just try and use this, it would be a waste. It wouldn't do what I need it to do. So at this point, she has this moment of desperately wanting to, like, be able to save her daughter and take the corpse. And she finally is like, I can't even think about that. I need to save my daughter. So she grabs William Ann and there's a bunch of shades near her. Let's see, Silence whispered into the air as she ran, I hate you. Each step was agony. She was growing old. I hate you. What you did to me, what you did to us. She didn't know if she was speaking to grandmother or the God beyond. So often they were the same in her mind. Had she ever realized that before? I liked that moment a lot. Being like, I, have a lot of resentment towards my parents, but also low-key, it's toward God. Like, why are things this way? And honestly, that is a very relatable. Oh, shit. So she sees light and believes that she can see the way stop, but then there's like hundreds of red eyes around her, and she has to use the silver dust that she's got left to make a circle. And, it's been mentioned, silver goes bad. When these shades touch them, it doesn't just, stay as a barrier permanently. The silver will be used up, essentially, and need replacing. So this, circle will help, but it isn't like they can just, cower and wait until morning. They could get through it eventually. Shades came at her frail barrier, throwing up sparks, making Silence open her eyes. They backed away. Then others came, beating against the silver, their red eyes illuminating the writhing black forms. Why did you send us here? She screamed, looking up past hundreds of glowing red eyes. What is the point? There was light ahead. She could see it. She was only a few yards from the way stop. She would die like grandmother had, mere paces from her home. And as she's laying there, she sees that branch in front of her had a very odd shape. And then she realizes it's a crossbow bolt. It says right here, it had lodged into the tree after being fired from the way stop earlier that day. I didn't even, I was so focused on her finding this bolt, I didn't even register that part. Okay, cool. So, she manages to use that. And again, her fucking self is beginning to shrivel up because it's a weapon, yes, but it's not like she isn't in contact when she uses it. So she's coming in and she's looking for silver powder, but she's also starting to die. And she's like seeing that there's, as she's unscrewing the lid of one of the jars, that her fingers are like totally withering away. She dunked the jar of silver powder into the water cistern and pulled it out, then stumbled to William Ann. And then she brings the water over and begins to pass out after she dumps the water on her daughter's face. And we have this moment where it's like she is talking to her grandmother, but also in a memory. And I couldn't tell if it's supposed to be like that she's speaking to her grandmother beyond the grave. Her weathered face was covered in droplets of water from the crashing surf. The God beyond sent us. It's part of the plan. You can rail against the God beyond, but it will change nothing. William was a fool and an idiot. You're better off. We are 4 scouts. We survive. We will be the ones to defeat the evil someday. I'm with child, Silence said. Grandmother stopped. William? Who else? Grandmother continued on. No condemnations? It's done, Grandmother said. We are 4 scouts. If this is how we must continue, so be it. I'm more worried about the way stop and meeting our payments to those damn forts. And this is when Silence is like, oh, I've got an idea, but I won't tell you what it is. And this is when she says, I will not have you interfering with my child. I will raise my own as I will. Grandmother vanished into the shadows. And she wakes up and she's alive. And Dob, the stableman, the guy who's mentally handicapped, is like, yeah, I fucking know you're the White Fox. I'm not completely clueless, lady, okay? Like, goddamn, give me a little bit of credit. And I did really enjoy that she just takes it for granted. He has no idea. And he's like, I just don't fucking say anything because why would I? But yeah, come on. She lifted her daughter to the rooms above and saw to her. The leg wasn't as bad as Silence had feared. A few of the toes would be lost, but the foot itself was hale enough. The entire left side of William Ann's body was blackened, as if burned. That would fade, with time, to gray. Everyone who saw her would know exactly what had happened. Many men would never touch her, fearing her taint. This might just doom her to life alone. And this is one of those things, again, where I was talking earlier about, like, is it worth it? She raises her daughter as she sees fit, as she asked to do, and does not put her through what her grandmother put her through. And that is all well and good. But now her daughter is permanently disfigured and will likely be alone the rest of her life and not get to live a fuller life, maybe have kids if that was what she was going to do. And was not putting her through the trauma that Silence was put through as a child worth the sacrifice of her well-being at this point. And this is ultimately not a price that Silence gets to say was worth it or not worth it. You know, this is the sort of thing that it's her daughter that decides. But her daughter didn't get a choice. She didn't say, I would rather not get that training, thank you. And she is now paying a price for her own decision. Parents make those choices for us because we're kids, you know? So it's just a really awful situation where you make the choice and then your kids pay the consequences. And that's just how it goes. That's the way it works. And I wonder if she knew what was going to happen, would she still have chosen to raise her daughter this way? I feel she probably would. I think knowing that, like, the relationship that she and William have, they are close. And I feel like she wouldn't be able to bear it if her child looked at her the way she looked at her grandmother. I don't think she could have stood it to have that sort of animosity between the two of them. And that's, again, you know, is that selfishness? Is she making a choice due to her own desires? And is that a fair decision to make? Should we judge her for doing what makes her personally feel more comfortable and makes her own life feel better, even though it might be dooming her daughter? It's so hard to say. And, like, it does make her feel more comfortable, and it makes her life more pleasant to have this good relationship with her daughter. But it makes her daughter's life more rich and pleasant to have a good relationship with her own mother. So it's not as if William's not getting anything out of it. It's just, again, it's not up to her, which is what's so frustrating. Tony says, does she put Sabruki through hell training now? This is the thing, is like, Sabruki, the reaction that she had to seeing these guys out here, when she saw that it was the people who had killed her family, she was about to bring down the entire, like, she was going to violate the rules to a degree where she was about to get everybody killed. I feel training Sabruki is a different beast than training William. Thing is, you're dealing with a kid who's got PTSD. So I don't know that it would be smart to train her, because I don't know how she handles something like that. I feel like if you've got a kid that otherwise knows that you are looking out for them and are safe, and they genuinely have felt safe to a degree, as much as you can within this world, their whole lives, their reaction to being put into these situations of training will be different than a kid like Sabruki, who has seen the murder and horror that she has. So personally, I wouldn't fuck with that. I feel like you're risking yourself as much as her, and you're risking other people who are nearby as well. I don't know. I don't think that would be a good idea. I could understand the impulse, and I don't know Sabruki that well, you know, so I'm just sort of going off of what I've seen. And granted, I saw her at, like, one of her worst points when she is confronted with the man who murdered her entire household and family. But I don't know. And this is the thing. This is why I don't want to have kids, guys. You have to make these fucking choices. How do you make a choice like that? How do you decide what's worth it when you aren't the one who has to live with it, really? Not really. I just don't, no thank you. No thank you. So, Silence had been close to that too. She had been there before, another of grandmother's preparations. Oh, how she had hated that woman. Silence owed who she was to how the training had toughened her. Could she be thankful for grandmother and hateful both at once? She'd lost the bounty. The shades would have had at that body. The skin would be dust, the skull blackened and ruined. She had no way to prove she'd taken Chesterton. She thought for hours. Could she pay Theopolis off some way? Borrow from someone else? And then, all of a sudden, somebody walks in the back door. and it's Theopolis, and she had not expected to see him this quickly. And he goes to close the shutters, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Haven't you warned me you loathe that people might see us together?" And she's like, "I know what you did." And he's like, "What I did? I don't know what you mean. I do lots of things. What could you possibly be referring to?" And it's just like incredibly infuriating. So this is when she says, "Not only did you set me up, but you went after this guy with a crossbow." And I hadn't put that together. I don't know if you guys did by this point. It didn't even occur to me that Theopolis was out here with a crossbow. I think, honestly, I didn't think Theopolis would be able to use a crossbow. He sounds like such a dandy that the idea of him being able to aim with that kind of precision, I just didn't even consider it. And I don't know why not, because a guy like him has to survive out here with some sort of skill. So yeah, the mud he'd tracked in shone very faintly blue in the light of the glow paste remnants. "You followed me," she said. "You were there last night." And he took a step forward. Silence backed away, her heel hitting the wall behind her. She reached around, taking out the key and unlocking the door behind her. Theopolis grabbed her arm, yanking her away as she pulled open the door. "Going for one of your hidden weapons?" he asked with a sneer. "The crossbow you keep on the pantry shelf? Yeah, I know of that." And this is when she's like, "I'm not signing anything, fuck you." And he slaps her in the face and is like, "Ugh, I wish that you were as silent as your name implied. It just really is such a bummer." And she has blood on her lip from him hitting her. And he behaves as if like, "Yeah, I drew blood inside of a very safe place. Nothing is going to happen." She flipped the drop of blood at him. It hit him on the cheek. "Always follow the simple rules, even when you think you don't have to. I wasn't opening the pantry, as you thought." And it turns out the door she opened is to this small shrine to the god beyond. And the bottom of the door is rimmed in silver because she's keeping her grandmother's shade in there. Which is honestly so smart. I love this so much. I think her grandmother would be fucking delighted. I really think that she would have been like, "Look, I may have become a shade, but what you've got set up here is pretty fucking baller. So yeah, I will go for this 100%. She would be so happy that Silence came up with this idea to begin with. I feel like she'd really think, "Okay, you know what? Mission accomplished. I did what I needed to do." So yeah, and it took me a second to understand the bottom of the door itself that she opens is rimmed in silver. I thought it meant like the door jamb where you know what I mean? And I was like, well, then how does she get out? But it's the door itself. So when she swings it open, there's a break and the shade can come out. It was a newer shade, its form still strong despite the writhing blackness of its clothing. A tall woman, hard of features with curling hair. Theopolis opened his mouth, then his face withered away, eyes sinking into his head. I love this so much. The shade turned to her. Silence shivered, looking into those dead, glassy eyes of a matriarch she loathed and loved. "I hate you," Silence said. "Thank you for making me hate you." She held the crossbow bolt before her, but the shade did not strike. Silence edged around, forcing the shade back. It floated away from her, back into the shrine lined with silver at the bottom of its 3 walls where Silence had trapped it years ago. Almost, she thought it remembered. And almost Silence felt guilty for trapping that soul inside the small closet for all these years. Don't feel guilty, Silence, like at all. She would 100% have wanted to be used this way. Like, I swear to God, it's just perfect. I think she would be so pleased. So then we go to Silence finding Theopolis's cave, and the body is there. And she's like, I do not know what I'm going to do, because he was my go-between to get my bounties. So if he's gone, how do I do this and manage to cash in on the bounty without everybody knowing who the fuck I am? And what she does is so smart. She makes it seem as if Theopolis is the white fox, and that he got eaten by a shade, but he had already gotten Chesterton before he died. So the body is there. And it's like, if you think about what she expected to happen to the body, it doesn't totally make sense, because they probably would have gone, like the shades that got Theopolis would have gone after Chesterton, and his body wouldn't have made it out. But I'm sure she accounted for that somehow. And it's a perfect cover. Everybody stops asking about the white fox because they think they know who it is. I'm really wondering if that's going to be like, if they're going to start to realize the white fox isn't gone because people are still getting caught, or if they're just going to put it down to like a new guy in town, you know? And so she manages to like get the money from the Chesterton bounty. And I don't think, because Theopolis is dead, I don't think she has to pay that at all. So she just gets to have that crazy amount of money. And I really love this scene between Ernest and Dagon. And Dagon is still trying to like get her attention. And Ernest is like, you know that like 7 dudes have tried to get her to marry them, right? Because she's got a lot of money now. And Dagon says something about poor Silence. How had it been stumbling upon his cave and finding him inside all withered away? Oh yeah, poor Silence. She's so cut up over it. So they make a toast, and Dagon is like, I need to come up with somebody new to tell stories about her, else nobody's going to buy me a drink. And then he says, there is still Bloody Kent. He's a nasty guy. Like, and he starts on a whole thing, and that's how the story ends, is him being like, all right, let me spin a new yarn. I don't know if like Bloody Kent is a real thing or if he's just making him up on the spot, but either way, I think it's a really solid way to end the story. Keep it going, you know, especially considering we still have, I don't know. I was going to say we still have Silence out here, and she's still going to be collecting bounties, which can be then assigned to Bloody Kent. But she may have enough money now that she doesn't bother with bounties anymore. She may just be retired. I hope so, for her sake, that she doesn't do this shit anymore after all that. All right, so I have to wrap. I'm over time, but thank you again, Jacqui, for commissioning this story. This is really fun to read. I really enjoyed this, and what a cool universe. I'm curious if I'm going to get to delve any further into that aspect of it. Jacqui says, I'm so glad you're getting to read more of Sando's later work with great female characters. Yeah, appreciate that as well. He's been like pretty good in ways, and then there are ways where it's like huge blind spot. It's, you know, one of those things. But anyway, all right, wrapping. Thank you guys again so much for listening. I hope you're enjoying the coverage. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.